Trundle is a staple champion of League of Legends. He's one of those high damage early game champions that wins a lot of melee 1v1s. And if you're looking to carry games, I would definitely recommend adding him to your pool. But why is he so good and able to carry? Let's find this out. One of the things that allows Trundle to dominate and carry so well is he scales super well and is great in the early levels. His passive and Q damage slow allow him to both sustain and do high damage at early levels. This means he's hard to kill at level 1 because of his sustain and is able to outdamage enemies with his Q and lethal tempo rune combo. Now combine this with his E and W at level 2 and 3 and this results in a very dominant early game. These three abilities allow him to combo engage onto enemies with his E pillar slow, then instantly onto his W ability for the chase down as it gives him extra movement speed and attack speed, and then follow up with his Q damage slow. This is one of his main combos and can be used in any order, meaning instead of starting with the pillar, you can instead start with the W engage for a chase down Q. Trundle's level 6 is great for 1v1s, again one of the reasons why he dominates, gives him extra damage and tankiness, making him win almost all 1v1s when he's ulted the enemy. At level 11, Trundle's ultimate will do even more damage and will have maxed Q and extra points in W for increased attack speed, again allowing him to win 1v1s and scale super well. However, how dominant is he in teamfights? This will depend in what elo you're in, as he is a melee champion and so spacing and kiting becomes an issue for him, especially higher up in the elo. Although even in teamfights he's still useful as he can use his ranged pillar slow to slow down enemies and be a tanky frontliner. One thing to know is that Trundle can split push extremely well, which is one of the reasons he is so dominant, as if he split pushes an enemy player will have to defend, as Trundle is very strong at taking out towers. Mid to late game he can destroy through towers extremely quickly, and as stated earlier, his ultimate and abilities allow him to 1v1 almost any champion if he's able to get into auto range. Moving on to his item build, which is just another huge factor as to why he dominates. His core item build, Trinity Force to Ravenous Hydra and then Hullbreaker, allows him to have high 1v1 damage and rip through towers on his split pushes. Why these items work so well on Trundle is they complement with his attack speed, 1v1ing and split pushing. The items allow him to do all three aspects really well. On top of this, he gets HP for tankiness from the Trinity Force and Hullbreaker, so always consider these things when building for carrying. Also, 1v1ing and split pushing is super important in all elos, and since Trundle is so simple and easy to play, his abilities are pretty easy to land. It makes him super dominant in low elo 1v1s where players will not be as aware or respect his early game damage and combos, and so he can easily carry these games if you understand his abilities and how to use his combos. In mid elo, Trundle still dominates most melee 1v1s and is more useful than other top laners, as he has a ranged E pillar that allows him to slow enemies and create a disengage for allies. It's also easier to get your ranged ultimate off to damage squishy enemies in teamfights. High elo is where Trundle's laning and teamfighting becomes less dominant, as players will be more aware and respect his combos and damage in lane. On top of this, they will be spacing much better in teamfights and deal with Trundle's split pushing much better, making him less dominant in this elo. However, he's still strong in melee 1v1s and still needs to be dealt with on his split pushes, so experienced Trundle players will still do well in this elo. Although the lower elo you go, the more dominant Trundle will be. Lastly, on to mid to late game impacts on objectives, arguably the most important aspect and what decides the game. Taking objectives like Tower, Baron, Dragon and Inhibitors is what's going to win you the game, and Trundle is able to do all these things really well in the mid to late game. He's able to rip through Baron and Dragon once he's completed his 3 core items. This is something that you need from one of the 5 champions on your team when trying to dominate and carry games. Finally, as mentioned earlier, he's able to tear through towers and also has a great split push presence. If the enemy does not pay attention to his split push late game, he can easily end the game in a dominating fashion if not dealt with.